She walked into the wrong office by mistake, trembling and terrified, clutching a resume no one would ever read. 8 minutes later, she walked out holding a secret so devastating, so carefully guarded, that it had shaped an entire empire built on silence, shame, and a love too forbidden to speak aloud. Her shoes were scuffed. Her coat, 2 sizes too large, was borrowed from a shelter donation bin. She had rehearsed her interview answers in the mirror of a gas station restroom that morning, forcing confidence into a voice that had long forgotten what it felt like to be heard. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for what she would discover behind that mahogany door. Stay with me, because what comes next will either break your heart wide open or remind you that some truths are buried so deep they take a lifetime to surface. The morning had started like any other morning in her impossible life. She woke up on a friend's couch with $23 in her pocket, a phone with 7% battery, and an interview scheduled at one of the most prestigious companies in the city. She didn't know how she'd gotten the interview. The email had arrived 3 days prior, out of nowhere, like a miracle she didn't dare question. The position was entry-level, something in administration, filing paperwork, answering phones, the kind of work invisible people do to keep visible people powerful. She needed it, desperately. The kind of desperation that makes you willing to walk 4 miles in the rain because you can't afford the bus fare. She arrived early, drenched, her hair plastered to her forehead, her borrowed coat dripping onto the polished marble floors of the lobby. The building was a temple to wealth, all glass and steel, and the quiet hum of money circulating through invisible channels. She felt like an intruder, like her very presence was a violation of some unspoken code. The receptionist barely looked at her when she stammered her name, just pointed toward the elevators with a manicured finger and returned to her screen. 14th floor. Suite B. She memorized it like a prayer. But panic does strange things to memory. When the elevator doors opened on the 14th floor, she stepped out into a hallway that looked identical to every other hallway in the building. Identical doors, identical numbers. She walked left when she should have walked right, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She found a door marked with a brass plate, the letters elegant and authoritative, and she knocked before she could lose her nerve. No answer. She knocked again, softer this time, apologetic. Still nothing. She glanced at her phone. 2% battery. The interview was in 4 minutes. She couldn't be late. She couldn't afford to be late. So she did something she would never normally do. She turned the handle and pushed the door open, just a crack, just enough to peek inside and ask if anyone was there. The office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The skyline stretched out like a kingdom below. The furniture was dark wood and leather, the kind that smelled like old money and older secrets. And there, behind a desk that could have doubled as a dining table, sat a man she recognized instantly. Not from personal experience, but from the news, from magazine covers, from the occasional billboard. He was the kind of powerful that didn't need introduction. The kind of powerful that made people nervous just by existing in the same room. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered across his face. Something that wasn't anger or annoyance, but something deeper, something almost like recognition. But that was impossible. They had never met. She was nobody. He was everybody. She froze in the doorway, her mouth open, an apology forming on her lips. But before she could speak, he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her want to run. He didn't ask who she was or why she was there. He didn't call security or demand an explanation. Instead, he did something far stranger. He walked around the desk slowly, deliberately, his gaze never leaving her face, and he stopped just a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines carved into his forehead by years of carrying weight no one else could see. He whispered something then, something so quiet she almost didn't hear it. A name. A woman's name. A name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 8 years, not since the night her mother disappeared from her life without explanation, without goodbye, leaving behind only questions and a silence that stretched into forever. She felt the floor tilt beneath her, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to ask how he knew that name, why he was saying it now, what connection he could possibly have to the woman who had abandoned her when she was barely 16. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stare at him, at this stranger who suddenly felt like the keeper of every secret she had spent her entire adult life trying to forget. He stepped back then, his composure cracking just slightly, and he gestured toward a chair. Not an order, but an invitation. "Sit down," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't used it properly in days. "Please sit down. We need to talk. There's something you need to know. Something I should have told someone a long time ago." And so she sat, because what else could she do? She sat in that leather chair in that impossibly expensive office, her wet coat dripping onto the carpet, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs, and she waited for him to explain why her mother's name had just fallen from his lips like a confession, waited for him to unravel the mystery that had haunted her for 8 years, waited for the truth she didn't know she had been searching for all along. What he told her next would change everything, not just her understanding of her past, but the trajectory of her entire future. Because some secrets aren't just secrets. Some secrets are doorways. And she had just walked through one by accident, into a story far bigger and far more heartbreaking than she ever could have imagined. He didn't sit back down behind his desk. Instead, he moved to the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense beneath the fabric of his tailored suit. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and for a moment she thought he had changed his mind, that he would ask her to leave, to forget she had ever walked into this room. But then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of years, of regret so heavy it seemed to pull the air from the room. "Your mother worked for me," he said quietly. "Not here, not in this building. This was years ago when I was still trying to prove myself, when the company was just an idea scribbled on napkins and funded by loans I had no business taking. She was my assistant, the first person I ever hired, the only person who believed in me when everyone else saw a fool chasing an impossible dream." She felt her throat tighten. Her mother had never mentioned working for anyone important. Her mother had worked retail jobs, night shifts at diners, anything that paid under the table, and didn't ask too many questions. At least, that's what she had always been told. That's what she remembered from the fragmented years before everything fell apart. He turned to face her then, and she saw something raw in his expression, something vulnerable that seemed completely at odds with the man the world knew. "We became close," he continued. "Too close. It wasn't supposed to happen. I was married. Unhappily, but married nonetheless. My wife came from old money, the kind of family that doesn't forgive mistakes or tolerate scandal. The kind of family that would destroy anyone who threatened their carefully constructed image. Your mother knew that. We both knew that. But sometimes knowing something doesn't stop you from feeling it." The pieces were starting to form a picture she didn't want to see. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles white. She wanted to interrupt, to tell him to stop, but she couldn't find her voice. She could only listen as he dismantled everything she thought she knew about the woman who had given birth to her, and then vanished like smoke. "It lasted 2 years," he said. 2 years of stolen moments and lies, and the constant fear of being discovered. She wanted me to leave my wife. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But my wife's family controlled the funding for the company. One word from them, and everything I had built would have collapsed. I told myself I was being practical, that I was protecting our future, that once the company was stable, once I had leverage, I could make the choice I should have made from the beginning. But the truth is, I was a coward. I chose my ambition over the woman I loved, and she knew it. He paused, his jaw tightening, and she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. "The day she left," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "she came to my office. She told me she was pregnant. She told me she couldn't keep living in the shadows, couldn't keep pretending that what we had was enough. She gave me an ultimatum. Choose her, or choose everything else." And I froze. I stood there like a statue, unable to speak, unable to move, and she saw the answer in my silence. She walked out that door, and I never saw her again. The room tilted. The walls seemed to press inward. Pregnant. Her mother had been pregnant. Which meant... She couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick, too heavy. Her vision blurred at the edges. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. He was across the room in an instant, his hand on her shoulder, steadying her, his touch gentle despite the strength she could feel in his grip. "I didn't know," he said urgently, and there was desperation in his voice now, a plea for understanding. "I swear to you, I didn't know she had the baby. I didn't know about you. I hired investigators to find her, spent years searching, but she had disappeared completely, changed her name, left the state. I thought she had moved on, found someone better, someone who deserved her. It wasn't until 3 weeks ago that I learned the truth. 3 weeks ago." The timeline made her head spin. 3 weeks ago she had been sleeping in her car, applying to hundreds of jobs, drowning in a desperation she couldn't name, and he had been learning about her existence. "How?" she managed to whisper. "How did you find out?" He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside was a photograph, old and faded, the edges worn from handling. It showed her mother, younger, laughing, her arm around a man who looked like a ghost of the person standing before her now. Beneath the photograph was a birth certificate, her birth certificate, and there, in the space marked father, was a name she had never seen before. His name. "Your mother died 6 months ago," he said, and the words hit her like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry. I know you must have questions, must have needed her, and I'm so sorry she wasn't there. But before she died, she left instructions with a lawyer. Instructions that if anything happened to her, I was to be contacted. I was to be told about you. And I was to be given this." He handed her an envelope, sealed, her name written on the front in handwriting she recognized instantly. Handwriting that had signed permission slips and written grocery lists and left notes on the kitchen counter before disappearing forever. Her hands shook as she took it, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. Sharing these heartbreaking stories isn't easy, but if you feel the weight of these hidden bonds, subscribe and join us. Your like can spread empathy, and your comment can share a story that touches another soul. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we never knew we were part of. She didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Not in front of him. Instead, she looked up at this stranger who claimed to be her father. This powerful man who had built an empire on the foundation of a choice he regretted, and she asked the only question that mattered. Why now? Why did you bring me here? Why did you schedule an interview that was never real? He met her gaze, and she saw tears there, tears he wasn't bothering to hide. "Because," he said, voice breaking, "I've spent 8 years trying to atone for my mistakes. 8 years building something that could provide for you, protect you, give you the life your mother wanted you to have. And when I learned you existed, when I learned you were struggling, barely surviving, I couldn't let you keep suffering because of my failures. So I created the interview. I brought you here, not to manipulate you or force anything, but to tell you the truth, to give you the choice I never gave your mother, the choice to know who you are and where you come from." She sat there, the envelope in her lap, her entire world rewritten in the span of minutes, and she realized that walking into the wrong office hadn't been a mistake at all. It had been fate. It had been the universe finally, mercifully bringing her home. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. The kind of silence that wraps around a moment too big for immediate words, too profound for rushed reactions. She sat there holding the envelope, feeling its weight, knowing that inside were words her mother had written, knowing she would never be there to explain them herself. The cruelty of that realization hit her in waves. Her mother had carried this secret alone, had died alone, had made sure the truth would surface only after she was gone, as if she couldn't bear to face the consequences of her choices while still breathing. He moved back to the window, giving her space, perhaps sensing that proximity felt too intimate for someone who had just discovered. Her entire identity had been a carefully constructed fiction. The city sprawled below them, indifferent to the earthquake happening in this room, millions of people going about their lives while hers fractured and reformed into something unrecognizable. "I know this is overwhelming," he said finally, his voice measured, careful. "I don't expect you to process this immediately. I don't expect you to forgive me or even acknowledge me. Your mother made her choices. I made mine. And you've paid the price for both. That's the unbearable truth of it all. You suffered for decisions made before you even existed. She found her voice then rough and unfamiliar. Why didn't she tell me? All those years, even when things were falling apart, even when we had nothing. Why didn't she tell me you existed? That I had a father who could have helped, who could have changed everything. He turned back to face her, and the pain in his expression was so raw it almost made her look away. Because she loved you more than she hated me, he said simply. Because telling you would have meant explaining why she chose to raise you in poverty rather than compromise her dignity. It would have meant admitting that the man she loved valued his reputation more than her happiness. It would have meant teaching you that love isn't always enough, and what mother wants to teach her child that lesson. The logic was devastating in its clarity. Her mother had protected her from the truth, not out of spite, but out of love, had chosen silence over bitterness, had raised her daughter to believe in possibility rather than to resent what might have been. It was both beautiful and tragic, the kind of sacrifice that goes unrecognized because it's invisible, woven into the fabric of every difficult day and sleepless night. She thought about all those years, the evictions, the hunger, the nights her mother worked double shifts and came home so exhausted she could barely speak. The times they celebrated birthdays with dollar store candles and wishes that never seemed to come true. Her mother could have ended it all with a single phone call, could have demanded support, recognition, justice. But she hadn't. She had chosen pride and independence over comfort, had chosen to struggle rather than to beg. What did she want? She asked quietly. In the letter, what did she want you to do? He hesitated, and she saw something flicker across his face. Uncertainty. Fear. He pulled out another document from the folder, this one official, bearing the seal of a law firm, and he set it on the desk between them. She left instructions, he said carefully. She wanted you to have choices. Real choices. Not the survival decisions poverty forces on people, but actual agency over your own life. So she asked me to establish a trust, one that would provide for your education, your housing, your future, one that would give you the freedom she never had. The document detailed numbers that didn't feel real, amounts that could erase debt, fund degrees, purchase stability. It was more money than she had ever imagined having access to, more money than made sense. She stared at the figures until they blurred, her mind unable to reconcile the life she had been living with the life this paper promised. But there was a condition. There's always a condition. She wanted you to know the truth first, he continued. She didn't want you accepting anything from me without understanding where it came from, without understanding the cost. She wanted you to make an informed choice about whether you wanted me in your life at all. The money is yours regardless. The trust is irrevocable. But any relationship beyond that, any connection, that's entirely up to you. She made sure of it. She protected you even from beyond the grave. The tears came then, sudden and overwhelming. Not sad tears exactly, but the release of years of confusion and anger and grief, finally finding an explanation. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. Her mother had been protecting her. Even in death, even in absence, her mother had been fighting for her dignity, her autonomy, her right to choose her own path. If you've ever felt the ache of hidden truths, of family secrets that shaped your life in ways you couldn't see, subscribe and walk this journey with us. Your like reminds us why these stories matter. Your comment might hold the key to someone else's healing, because we're all connected by the invisible threads of the lives that made us. He waited while she cried, didn't try to comfort her or make it stop, just stood there bearing witness to her grief. When she finally looked up, her face wet, her eyes swollen, she asked the question that mattered most. Did you love her? Really love her? Or was she just a mistake you regretted? His composure cracked completely then. I loved her, he said, and his voice broke on the words. I loved her more than I've loved anything before or since. I loved her enough to regret every single day of the last 18 years. I loved her enough that I stayed in a loveless marriage as penance because I didn't deserve happiness after what I did to her. I loved her enough that when I learned she was gone, that I'd lost my chance to apologize, to make it right, I couldn't function for weeks. So yes, I loved her, and I lost her, and I have to live with that. The truth of it resonated in the space between them. This wasn't a villain explaining away his sins. This was a broken man confessing to the daughter he never knew, the living consequence of his greatest regret. It didn't excuse what he had done. It didn't erase the years of struggle, but it complicated the narrative. It made him human in a way that was difficult to reconcile with her anger. She stood up slowly, clutching the envelope and the trust documents. "I need time," she said. "I need to read what she wrote. I need to process this without you here. But I want you to know something." She paused, searching for the right words. "My mother raised me to believe that people are more than their worst decisions. That redemption is possible if the remorse is real. So I'm not closing the door, but I'm not opening it yet either. I'm standing in the threshold, trying to figure out which way to step." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's more than I deserve," he said quietly. "Take all the time you need, and know that regardless of what you decide, you have resources now. You have options. You have the freedom to build whatever life you want. That's what she wanted for you. That's what I want for you too." She walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at him one last time. "What was she like?" she asked. "When you knew her, before everything fell apart. What was she like?" A ghost of a smile touched his face, sad and distant. "She was light," he said softly. "Pure light. She laughed at terrible jokes and believed impossible things and made everyone around her feel like they mattered. She was the best person I ever knew. And you look exactly like her." She carried those words out of the office with her, along with the envelope and the documents, and the secret that had been buried for 8 years. The secret that explained everything and complicated everything and changed absolutely everything. She didn't go to the interview she had been scheduled for. There was no interview. There never had been. Instead, she found herself sitting on a bench in a park 3 blocks from the building, the envelope still sealed in her hands, the autumn wind pulling leaves from the trees around her. People walked past, jogging, talking on phones, pushing strollers, living their ordinary lives while she sat at the epicenter of an earthquake only she could feel. The world looked the same, but everything had shifted. The ground beneath her feet was new territory entirely. She opened the envelope slowly, carefully, as if the paper itself might shatter. Inside were 3 pages, handwritten in her mother's distinctive script, the letters slightly slanted, some words crossed out and rewritten, evidence of the difficulty of saying goodbye. She took a breath and began to read. "My dearest girl, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you finally know the truth I spent your whole life hiding. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for the secrets. I'm sorry for the struggle. I'm sorry that I chose pride over comfort and made you pay the price for my stubbornness. But I want you to understand why I made the choices I did, even if you can never forgive them. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was terrified, not because I didn't want you, but because I knew that bringing you into the world meant facing impossible choices. Your father was a good man trapped in bad circumstances, and I loved him desperately. But I also knew that staying with him meant living in the shadows forever, being the secret that could never be acknowledged, raising you as the child that couldn't exist. I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't let you grow up feeling like you were something to be ashamed of, something to be hidden. So I left. I chose uncertainty over indignity. I chose poverty over compromise, and I would make the same choice again." The tears came again, blurring the words, but she forced herself to keep reading. "I know the years were hard. I know there were nights you went to bed hungry. I know there were times you resented me, times you wondered why we had to struggle when other families seemed to have everything. And I'm sorry I couldn't explain. But I needed you to grow up strong and independent, not dependent on a man who had proven he would choose comfort over courage. I needed you to know that your worth doesn't come from money or status or who your father is. Your worth comes from who you are. And you, my beautiful girl, are worth everything. By the time you read this, he will have told you about the trust, about the money, about the life you can now have. And I want you to take it. Not because you need him, but because you deserve it. It's not charity, it's restitution. It's what he should have provided all along. Take it and build something extraordinary. Go to school, travel, create, love. Do all the things poverty kept us from doing. But never forget where you came from. Never forget that the hardest years taught you resilience that money can't buy. As for your father, that's your decision to make. I won't poison you against him. He made mistakes, terrible ones, but he also loved deeply and suffered for his choices. If you want to know him, if you want to build a relationship, you have my blessing. But do it on your terms. Don't let guilt or obligation dictate your heart. You owe him nothing. Whatever you choose, choose it freely. I'm sorry I won't be there to see who you become. I'm sorry I won't meet your children or celebrate your victories or hold you through your losses. But know that every moment I had with you was a gift. You were never a burden. You were never a mistake. You were always, always the greatest love of my life. Be brave, my darling. Be bold. Be exactly who you want to be. Forever your mother. She folded the letter carefully, reverently, and pressed it against her chest. The grief was enormous, but it wasn't hollow anymore. It had shape now. It had context. Her mother's choices made sense in a way they never had before. The struggle hadn't been punishment. It had been principle. Her mother had sacrificed everything to give her daughter something more valuable than money. She had given her dignity. She had given her strength. She had given her the knowledge that she could survive anything. She thought about the man in the office, this stranger who was her father, who had spent 8 years trying to build something big enough to atone for what he had lost. She thought about his tears, his regret, his willingness to give her space and power and choice. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't demanding a relationship. He was simply offering her the resources her mother had wanted her to have and leaving the rest up to her. Could she forgive him? Could she let him into her life? She didn't know yet, but she knew she could give him the same thing he had given her: time, space, the possibility of something new built on the ruins of something broken. She stood up from the bench, the letter tucked safely in her pocket, along with the trust documents, and she looked back toward the building where her life had split open. She thought about the poor girl who had walked in there that morning, desperate and afraid, wearing borrowed clothes and carrying a resume for a job that didn't exist. That girl was gone now. In her place was someone else entirely, someone with choices, someone with resources, someone with a story that explained the holes in her history. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to the number he had given her. "Thank you for telling me the truth. Thank you for honoring my mother's wishes. I'm not ready for more than this yet, but I will be someday. Until then, know that I'm okay. I'm going to be okay, and maybe that's enough for now." She hit send and started walking, not back to the friend's couch, not back to the life of survival and desperation, forward, toward something new, toward the life her mother had fought to give her, toward the future that had been waiting all along behind a door, marked with the wrong number. This was the journey of one soul, but so many others are waiting to be told. If you've ever felt the pain of lost connections or the joy of reunion, join our community. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and maybe even your own story. Together, we celebrate the essence of life and the bonds that unite us. Because sometimes the wrong door leads you exactly where you were always meant to be. Some secrets destroy, but some secrets, when finally revealed, become the foundation for something stronger than what came before. She had walked into that office with nothing. She walked out with everything her mother had wanted her to have. Not just money, not just answers, but the freedom to choose her own path, and that, more than anything, was the greatest gift of all.